Good morning and welcome everyone to day 2 of the Connected Virtual Tech Event. I'm so pleased to let everyone know that day 1 went incredibly well. We had over 2,500 booth views. We have 1,190 some odd people that have signed up for the event. And I'm very, very pleased with all the panels and how things went yesterday. I think you're in for a treat today. This panel, moderated by Jennifer Fritzsche, is going to be a terrific one, talking about a very, very topical issue, and I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it. I do want to thank all of our exhibitors and our sponsors for making this event available to everyone for free. I have no end of appreciation for what they've done to help us get this out. And we have announced as of yesterday that we will be doing another one July 22nd and 23rd. And I would love everybody to be a part of that with us. Without further ado, I'm going to let Jennifer take over, but thank you all for attending, being part of this, and making it such a successful event. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Rich, thank you so much, and thank you for putting on such a great event with amazing success. So I am the lucky one. I am been chosen to moderate a panel of 4 great gentlemen to discuss defining the edge. It's really going to talk about the true market outlook for industry leaders. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves and give a little bit of background about your companies, and we'll go from there. Gregg, why don't you start?
Sure. This is Gregg Patine with Edge Micro. I'm one of the co-founders. We've been working on this model of providing edge services at scale for going on 4 years. Part of that was with a larger company, but we spun out as with a little more ability to be nimble. And so for us, it's about providing co-location services at scale with micro real estate in underserved markets.
Great. Farad, why don't we turn to you?
Yeah, so I'm Farad Ali, CEO and president of Asociar. We're an 8-year-old company that focuses on really finding solutions for communities and helping build capacity within organizations. This edge computing is a new technology that we think is redefine how we go forward from looking at how you look at infrastructure and personal and in building. So we focus on as a value-added reseller in ensuring that we help this in-building edge process work better for businesses so they can hire more people.
Terrific. Ganesh?
Pleasure to be here. I'm Ganesh Sundarem, and the founder and CEO of a company called Alef Edge. We're a software company. My background is mobility, and as I would like to fondly talk to people when I introduce the company, we started working on the edge before edge was cool. Now, we seem to be converging around a common problem statement, and that is, as one of my friends who was a senior VP at Microsoft put it, edge is the new currency. It's defining, or latency is the new currency. It's defining a new distributed architecture for the entire internet, and I look forward to participating in this panel. Thank you for the opportunity.
Terrific. And Hugh, how about you?
Yeah, good morning, folks. Hugh Carspecken, Chief Strategy Officer of DartPoints. DartPoints started up in 2012. We had our first edge co-location data centers come online in 2013. Our first Fortune 500 started coming on as customers early 2014. So we've been at this for quite some time. We are an owner and operator of edge co-location facilities. And again, very pleased to be here on this panel this morning.
Terrific. Thank you all again for joining us. So yes, a lot of hype about the edge. One of our theories is that the edge is going to get a lot more attention coming on the other side of this crisis, and we will get to the other side. But I guess I want to start by looking, because you gave a good view of, by your company definitions, how you all define the edge. But I guess maybe throwing out an open-ended question and what might be an overused analogy of the baseball game. What inning do you all see us in? In a recent State of the Edge report, which is an excellent read and I'd highly recommend, it talked about the Asia Pacific has the largest edge computing footprint today. But when you do the math and what they expect will be next, it's only 0.2% of what the white paper expects the edge to look like by 2028. I'd be curious about all your opinions on that. Maybe we'll go in reverse order. Hugh, why don't you start that?
Sorry, just getting my mute and unmute. You know, there's a lot happening here. This is, the way we're looking at this is, the edge is an ecosystem, and there, as we well know, there's a lot of different definitions of edge. It's an overly defined and underdefined term at the same time. There is, with regards to edge computing versus edge infrastructure, those are, again, two different things. They don't necessarily indicate each other. I'm not surprised that Asia Pacific area has focused, has got that out a little bit further. They were unencumbered with a lot of the copper network that we've got here in the United States and North America. But as I mentioned, with regards to the ecosystem, we're seeing about 30 to 40 completely separate industries combining now within the ecosystem, within the edge. And a vast majority of those have not been a part of telecom or data. They've typically been users of this data, but now what we're seeing is that they're influencers of this data and helping the design of some of these networks. And that will change some of the definitions that we're seeing and the types of deployments, whether North America or other parts of the world.
Ganesh, how about you?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a very interesting starting, you know, to start off, the observation around Asia Pacific being sort of a bellwether and a leading indicator is not uncommon in the mobile industry. Japan has been a leading adopter of new technology, so has Korea. Lately, India and other parts. And to Hugh's point, that's absolutely right. I think much of these networks are very mature in the U.S. and other developed markets, whereas not that Japan is not, but they just experiment faster. So to a large extent, we are, Alef in particular, Alef Edge is a contributor to the percentage you talked about, Jennifer. We have deployments, commercial deployments in India. And to expand on that, it is definitely a moment for us to take a little bit of time to actually clarify the definitions. The Linux Foundation Edge, Alef Edge as it's called, has done some work on the taxonomy and the terminology that goes into the edge. But broadly speaking, there's the device edge and the infrastructure edge. And within the infrastructure edge, there are different components. It's the baseline data center that defines it. And then on top of it, you have the compute is divided into the hardware components and the software components. From a technology perspective, we've taken a software-defined mobile edge perspective, but more importantly, the use cases may define how gets edge adopted. The access technologies might be the leading front end. Maybe carriers are, maybe enterprises are, maybe different other access technologies. And now lately, we are finding out through our partnerships and the announcements that have been made, the hyperscale and the hyper data center companies are also significant and non-trivial participants in defining what is the edge. So we're just getting started. I certainly subscribe to the comment that you just made, that it is potentially overdefined and potentially underdefined, and some clarification will emerge out of this, not to mention the fact that everyone is going to have their point of view on this.
Got it. Farad, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I actually believe that the edge computing system is very dynamic in that it will create new business opportunities for new businesses as well as to enhance the growth of other businesses. When you look at some of the in-building locations of how that's important towards the buildings that we're looking at, and when you look at the vehicle multi-application hosting processes that could happen with the multiple LAN or WAN connection, I think you recognize how the edge computing opportunities are huge. As you're looking at, your original question was like, how do you look at it from the standpoint of what inning are we in? I think we're probably in the second inning. You know, these IoT devices like the edge far exceeds all of our current devices. My cell phones become little machines that allow us to improve this. So if you're strictly looking at the processing of how we're moving, we may be a little bit further in the second inning, maybe the fourth inning. But while the growth of this is processing, you know, it will increase. We'll see that there'll be a shift from kind of the cloud to the edge. So I believe that there'll be more education on edge applications. So we're definitely in the early innings of opportunity for edge, and I think where it goes, it's yet to be seen.
Gregg, how about you? Fourth inning is good for edge micro, or you think we're even earlier?
Yeah, we're not quite in the fourth inning. I would agree with Farad. Second inning sounds about right. To be able to enable, as Hugh was saying, to enable some of the workloads that could be re-architected to perform better, needs physical infrastructure at scale, closer to the users, and that is just beginning with companies like Dartpoints and ourselves to be able to put these micro data centers at scale in sites in underserved markets. Underserved could be NFL cities, but that do not have the best peering around. So to get that physical infrastructure out there to enable these workloads is just beginning.
Got it. And so we've touched on this, but I'm just curious on each of your opinions. You know, the edge has two sides, clearly an infrastructure side and a device side. Maybe a third side is a software side. If so, I guess of the infrastructure and device side, which side is further along on the path? Farad?
Yes, I see the infrastructure side is further along today. But the ease of replacing smaller devices with more powerful processors will further drive our device edge. I would, however, also make the case that more people work from home, as we're seeing right now due to this COVID crisis. The infrastructure capacity demand will grow, and having that ability to be able to have these small cells are going to be important.
Hugh, would you agree with that? I think you're muted, Hugh.
That's my bad habit in life. But respectfully, no. I do see what Farad is looking at, but the infrastructure side is woefully inadequate. And when I say infrastructure, I mean the physical infrastructure, not necessarily the compute, though where the compute stands and how it's connected and how it's powered is behind. Having been one of the guilty parties and having built the fiber networks and cellular networks for the United States, this fiber in so many different ways is a rat's nest. And people are absolutely improving it now. They're working on it. The fiber does expire. A lot of people dropped a lot of stuff in it and realized it was the wrong fiber as they started turning on fiber brag grading onto it. And so there's a lot of things that have to happen here. And again, as I had mentioned earlier, one of the reasons why some third world countries, for example, has surpassed the United States in some of the infrastructure because they didn't have to contend against the owners of that infrastructure who had made $1 trillion investment in the dirt in the United States. And that's a hard investment to give up. But people do understand that we do have to change, that we are working on this. I do think that one of the key one of the key issues and challenges that we are facing is detangling the physical and the logical networking concepts.
Got it. Gregg, or Ganesh, I wanted to get to you on this, and then Gregg, I have an individual question for you. So Ganesh, what is your view on that? Infrastructure.
This is a very difficult question, but if I were looking at it historically, just in the past 1 year, the awareness has grown. So I'm not going to be able to quantify which side of the equation is further ahead. But I think architecturally, we are so far ahead in terms of what the requirements are. And depending on your point of view, the architectural aspects of it are much, much clearer. Where I think the real question in our mind that we need to address, and hopefully as an industry we can, is the category is defined now. Once the category is defined, we got to transcend from doing turnkey or pursuing turnkey opportunities to opportunities at scale. So I go back to Farad's earlier comment. If I look at it from the lens of going back to and looking at this transition from turnkey to products at scale, we may be on the early stages, and it doesn't matter which one is slightly ahead. I think there has to be some kind of movement to unify this. There have been approaches that have been taken. There are different edge consortiums. Alef Edge is one, Kinetic Edge Alliance is one. Gartner has its own views on these things. A lot of these things are adding up, but certainly agree with Hugh's comment that there is a certain amount of, there is a tendency on our part to reuse the underlying fabric. And so the ownership of this fabric is very, very diverse and almost fragmented. So I'm going to state that as a common problem statement for all of us. Unless some of these things get resolved fairly quickly, even if the other parts come together and are a little ahead, it'll be very difficult to make a $4 trillion market out of it in the next few years.
Got it. Thank you. Gregg, I want to turn to you and your view from Edge Micro. You know, there's been a lot of debate that the edge location could be the base of the tower, or is it a mini data center, or even the middle mile? What do you think, given your seat?
I would say it's the last mile. It's as Hugh was talking about, is this rat's nest of connectivity in the metro, and not quite as bad the backhaul, but certainly the metro networks. What we're trying to do is avoid that rat's nest, which basically from my house, a bit that I either download or upload, there's no telling what direction that's going to go, and there's no telling how many hairpins and trombones it takes before it gets to the central office, before it actually figures out where that nearest iTunes instance is that I need to access. So we're trying to avoid that rat's nest and actually site micro data centers in the last mile, and being able to provide point-to-point from our micro data center right into those subscription routers for those internet users, and avoiding all that hairpinning and tromboning, and thus facilitating high performance. So for us, it's really about working with companies that believe they have use cases and workloads that they can monetize if they can provide a consistent, latency of maybe less than 10 milliseconds, which is around human perception. And those are use cases like immersive technology, both AR and VR, gaming, high performance gaming, ultra HD type video collaboration tools like this, like Teams, like WebEx, ad networks, being able to place ads really fast. So in answer to your question, it can be anywhere that has fiber and that fiber can get out to those subscription routers owned primarily by the broadband ISPs. So to be able to scale this, you got to work with real estate providers that have, you know, hundreds of sites, and we can go into more detail on who those types of owners can be in one of your later questions.
Is the, just tailing off that, is the bigger conversation though, maybe we don't have enough fiber right now to deploy the edge? I mean, is more fiber in your view needed?
No, I believe there's plenty of bandwidth. I think it just needs to be re-architected to be able to avoid the inefficiencies that are inherent in the way that, as again, this rat's nest. It just needs to be re-architected to be able to provide better efficiencies.
Got it. Okay. Hugh, I want to shift back to you with your role at DartPoint. You know, clearly you're active in all parts of the edge, as you talked about. Curious where you think edge has the biggest development opportunity right now, and I think maybe the other question to that is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, so kind of piggybacking on some of the comments made earlier, reworking the interconnection is the biggest opportunity. There are arguments as to, hey, are we looking at layer 2? Are we going all the way up to layer 3 and IX peering? And it's all of the above. Not all places can sustain an IX, and not all places will be sufficiently met with a layer 2. But given the fact, but that sits on top of the biggest challenge, okay, which I had mentioned earlier. We've got a physical network, but we have programmers that only think in terms of logical networks. And again, it's no fault to anybody. But the issue here is, if you are trying to create a mesh on a fiber that has been built out in a hub and spoke, okay, you're going to have some inefficiencies. And so there's a little bit of fiber that needs to get placed out. There's new technologies that are starting to be deployed that can kind of help some of that. But placing some of your assets as an edge provider into, whether it's last mile or middle mile, or frankly, in some cases, the core that can actually help work this, we'll start moving that traffic in a way that it is being better consumed. One of the big things that's happened in the last couple of years, and has been a remarkable explosion in the last 4 weeks, is our networks are no longer single direction. They're all bidirectional now. Content is being created out of our pockets with our phones. Gamers, it's been incredible seeing this. We're going to see a whole ton of telemedicine. Precision agriculture has been one of the leaders in this for years, and those are just, I mean, it's funny, I use this example up, but John Deere has been on the forefront of autonomous tractors for, I think, 8 to 10 years now. I mean, it's crazy, and we think that autonomous driving vehicles is something that has been new. It's actually been out for quite some time at that level. But these are things that need to be reworked. And I give an example when people get a little too overzealous and they get too far out, and they really go to the base of far end of the network. Is I ask people, when you get on your phone and you go into your financial app, do you log in before or after you make the transaction? And that answers everything that you need to know about how this network and the apps on top of it have been designed and been built, okay? That shows us a ton of the challenges that the wireless carriers have got, and obviously the broadband providers have gotten, and there needs to be a lot of the rework in not only the physical, but also the readaptation of the logical.
Interesting. Yeah, now that you think about it, I do think that example you gave gives a really good illustration. Ganesh, I want to bring you into the conversation. What do you see as the relationship between 5G and the edge? In our, you had a memorable quote in our prep call earlier this week that I think it went something like this: 5G needs the edge, but the edge does not 5G. need 5G. Is this right? Did I characterize your work? So what is it?
Yeah, so I've been blamed for that quote multiple times. So yes, it is one of my pet peeves, and it also gives me a chance to simplify and approach the problem. And it, in my opinion, to validate that quote, I just have to point to our deployments. Almost all our deployments are 100% of our deployments are on 4G or Wi-Fi. It is not based on 5G. And in fact, all our deployments over the years have all been software defined, and we were in a position to look at one cross-section of the problem, potentially called the tromboning problem within carrier networks and enterprise networks, and we started honing in, and now we're looking at tower edge networks. So none of these require a connectivity environment that is based on 5G. So that validates the thesis that we have adopted. The second aspect of why this is important to keep in mind has to do with a potentially simple way of defining the edge. It's connectivity meets computing at the point of consumption. So if you take that abstract viewpoint, it doesn't matter. It has to be connectivity neutral. It has to be cloud neutral. So when you get both these worlds of IT and networking and access, networking access and IT, cloud, etc., to come together, that to me is a fertile ground to look for answers to some of the challenges vis-a-vis the edge, because the problem statement does not involve 5G. The other aspect of the component of 5G needs edge part is, if you go back and look at the standards, there are three major components of 5G. One of them is like ultra high bandwidth, right? The ultra high bandwidth is achievable with multiple antenna MIMO, massive MIMO as they call it, on 4G networks, and CBRS systems have already shown that you can achieve it on 4G. The second aspect of 5G is the edge. Without edge, you can't get the ultra low latency technologies. There's a third aspect of it which has to do with slicing, which is not yet explored fully yet, but hopefully the edge will give us a chance to explore slicing even more. So without the edge, 5G cannot stand on its own. So I'm making a broad observation, and but to validate the first part that you don't need 5G, just look at all our deployment, not just mine or our companies. It's just so many of us have been practicing the edge for quite some time, not having to wait for 5G. I hope that helps.
That's great. No, absolutely. And Farad, that actually brings into a question I wanted to ask you as to what do you think the biggest driver of the edge will be? I mean, will it be 5G? Will it be AI? Or are you seeing things in this crisis with COVID that you weren't thinking about 7 weeks ago?
Well, certainly. That part is definitely true. The urgency to look for edge solving some of the contemporary problems is definitely not lost on us, because this is completely uncharted territory for this human race at this point. None of us have been through a pandemic of this proportion. Absolutely not. We've heard about it, we've read about it potentially, but no, we've never experienced it. So it certainly gives us a different perspective. So I have fondly talked about in other panels just recently, the fact that we are having this virtual panel is already testament to the fact that if we had a curbside edge, would be useful for us. And what do I mean by that? At a very fundamental level, the transition that's taking place is telco switches which are on a curbside are getting replaced by data centers. That's the market we are evolving towards. So in that scenario, if that's what the driver is going to be, we should take advantage of it. However, prior to the pandemic and people really understanding the gravity of it, I think it was a little bit of blind man and the elephant going on in the edge internet. Okay, the desire to have a distributed internet and the value proposition that it brings is understood. However, the core driver dependent on your perspective. That's what I meant by the blind man and the elephant. However, the pandemic definitely has, in my opinion, given a focus on certain, upstream and what I would say dual mode application use cases, which might be drivers, and we may not go back to life as usual anytime soon. So that's something to keep in mind.
Okay.
So I could just edify his point. I think everything that Ganesh said, thumbs up, right? But I think the application, when you look at COVID, some like the things that we try to do with our edges and our in-building process is recognizing as you go towards the future, what we may be doing for like thermal technologies integrated with some access controls with security systems, letting people in. I served on the airport, board of an airport, and we talked around making sure people are getting on airplanes that are sick, understanding if you're doing any of those I'm forgetting the words, which I know the bio, when you put your fingers down and they know who you are, but you do that biometric. Thank you so much. When you do some of that biometrics, it's going to be important that you have these edges in these small cells. So, and recognizing that edge is about computing, right? And that's really, that's what that's about. 5G is more about the transmission and the bandwidth. So those are really the two different things. And I think that supports the comment that you got from Ganesh that 5G needs edge, but edge doesn't need 5G.
And I want to explore the supply chain with you, because the edge supply chain with you, Farad. I mean, you do work there. Are you noticing anything in this crisis that caused a major hiccup to that supply chain? Do you worry about that?
Yeah, I mean, particularly when you start looking around how people are going to, the excitement about edge should get more robust in the supply chain because people want to recognize what's going on. We have seen that the supply chain has slowed down because of the demand is not as high. And so as businesses are coming back, they're retooling their infrastructure to maximize, to be able to deal with issues around COVID, to protect themselves, which is going to allow for edge, I think a growth opportunity for edge. Or as people are coming back to work, people are talking about what their temperatures are, if they're sick. In the city where I'm at, people are now taking the temperature of people, determining if they're going back to work. So having kind of an edge computing system to do the biometrics will help make maybe the business more efficient. When you look at some of the meat processing plants that have closed, what can edge computing to help them to make that work better for them? So now people are looking at this as a strategy in their business function to make their supply chain more robust as they go forth and rebuild.
Got it. And, Gregg, this is a connected real estate virtual tech event. So I want to bring in real estate and the view on, how you think the role of commercial real estate will be in the edge. Some are pretty bearish on commercial real estate's recovery coming out of this with what we're all doing right now with my dog at the end of my bed here is working from home. How do you see that? Do you think there will be an aggressive push in the edge in commercial real estate, or you think we'll wait and see?
Real estate. Yes. A key component to this whole idea of edge. I think there's, to bifurcate what you might be looking for here, one is what is the workloads that will be going into commercial real estate now or post-COVID, as we've seen everything has moved from the central business district out to the suburbs. That's not what I want to address here. What I want to address is how commercial real estate is going to enable the infrastructure that Hugh and I are putting out there. And again, the companies that we're talking to that have workloads that they believe they can monetize, these are not huge workloads, but they need a rack or two racks in 100 or 200 sites around the country as quickly as they can get them. So trying to locate real estate that has connectivity at scale like that is extremely difficult, that can be permitted, that has power. So for us and others, you've got to look at the big real estate owners, whether that's companies like Blackstone or Brookfield, big box companies that have lots of real estate, public storage that has, you know, hundreds of sites. And then of course you've got the tower companies that have compounds all over the country. Now, you know, very limited number of those compounds that house these macro towers are suitable, and that they may not have enough room to site these micro data centers, or they only have minimum fiber, maybe one provider with 2 to 4 strands, and being it and convincing the other carriers, the network providers, to build in from a mile away is not going to happen. So trying to locate real estate at scale with some of these big public REITs and private REITs is critical.
Sorry, Hugh, I'd be interested in your view as well. You know, you had strong opinions on the commercial real estate. What say you?
Well, I mean, hands down, real estate's going to be a component to this. There are, I'll give an analogy. That movie, The Founder, talked about Ray Kroc and McDonald's, and the movie focused on his production and everything, and that was fantastic. But the movie, no fault of theirs, didn't bring in the single most driving factor to McDonald's success, which was the Eisenhower National Highway Project, which all of a sudden created massive highways that no longer that had off ramps and on ramps, but nothing there. And so immediately food and requirements and gas requirements all showed up. We're seeing this, which propelled McDonald's into one of the largest landowners in the U.S. We are seeing the same thing here. Amazon did not buy Whole Foods because they were really excited about fresh produce. And if you take a look at Tesla charging stations, and if you were to take this and overlay these charging stations, they are following our current highways, and in some ways, which those highways follow our railways, which obviously the fiber follows the railways. New purposes of real estate will be out there. So if I was in the real estate world, and we've been focusing on this for quite some time in terms of how to identify real estate in this evolution of data and its transmission, in terms of everything that comes down to the four corners of a highway interchange, and you're looking at an 800-meter transmission of some of those signals, and ultimately, what does that mean to the owners of that real estate and how much revenue they can pull from that data? In our properties that we've been located, if the property owner was participant in the revenue, we're making the equivalent of several plates of real estate within their property. So there is a significant enhancement to the NOI of that real estate. And then again, the brand new real estate that's out there, and how to convert it. And this is not about dropping a box. This is about how to convert specific real estate into the use that needs to be there. And in some cases, it's dropping a box. In some cases, it's retrofitting a box. In others, it's retrofitting a building. There's a lot of different ways to do this. It's the fastest way to market. It's going to be the most flexible.
Just on the COVID side of it, you know, as we all get back to normal, whatever normal is there privacy issues that these companies, we all have to be mindful of, especially commercial real estate and dealing with, you know, their tenants?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, God bless IoT. God bless a lot of this information that's coming out. But the farther, not get into some of the secrets of some of the of how they track, but when you shrink the radius of a gathering of people, your probability of identification of those people goes way up. So even though you are not announcing who you are, people know who you are just by the probability that you're there, okay? And so 5G is a capacity. They're shrinking small cells where you might handle maybe 1,000 users off of a cell. Small cells, you can get down into the tens and maybe even less. And so you do have to be extremely careful with who you are seeing and how you're anonymizing that data. If you think you're going to start doing brand new applications, I brought up the comment of airports. When you buy an airplane ticket, there will be the small print that says that you are submitting to a temperature check going into that. But if you're stepping into a commercial property, random people have not signed those, and so you are going to have to be careful. And I don't think you're going to want to be the police officer that's yanking someone out of an elevator just because they happen to be at 99.5 degrees. Okay. Well, I mean, technically it's 100.4. That's a fever, but people are, I mean, but if you're over the age of 70, 99.5 is a fever. But if you're 40 years old, 100.4. So the question is, where are these lines going to go? And there are going to be tons of apps that are going to be extremely helpful, but privacy is going to be a significant issue that needs to be overcome.
Got it. Ganesh, I wanted to bring you back here, because there's certainly, we talked about it, a software element to the edge, and you certainly have expertise here. Can you discuss how much of the edge is software versus hardware, maybe ultimately? Is it 75-25, or how do you see it?
It's a very difficult question. My perspective is it's not so much the percentage, it's more about the innovation that has to happen. And again, I'm going to rely on a quote by Mark Andreessen. He famously said about a decade ago, software is eating the world. And more recently, about a few years ago, I remember seeing a quote from Equinix saying, edge is eating the cloud. So many of these things are going to be an evolutionary phenomenon. From the perspective of the defining moment of the edge, I certainly subscribe to all the three tenets that real estate and shared infrastructure is going to be a significant component. The hardware piece is non-trivial, but as to the amount of innovation that's needed on the technology side, I think it's a little. There is already the technology that we need is probably already there, but the innovation platform that we need to focus on with respect to the architectural changes that have to take place, keeping in mind the trillions of dollars of investment that have already been made on these data centers and connectivity paradigms, is going to require software innovation. So in my opinion, it's not so much the percentage, but the massive amount of investments that have to be made going forward. So in a nutshell, I think every bit of investment that is going to be made in the edge is going to be software driven. My friends at Vapor, they've demonstrated to me that there is a certain amount of software that goes into their Vapor modules. When I talk to tower companies, there's a significant amount of software that goes into it. So there is going to be customized turnkey solutions, but at the same time, large platforms that are going to come up. So depending on your perspective, and I'll give you another perspective, if you're trying to look at edge as an extension of the cloud, it's 100% software, almost the innovation potential, because once the infrastructure as a service piece is already there, then it's just platforms and solutions on top of it. So to a certain extent, when we break it down into hardware and software on the computing side, I think the innovation quotient that's needed is higher on the software side. But where rubber meets the road, the hardware side is looking for eliminating business friction. The adoption strategies where people have to pay for the hardware and buy it as CapEx and things like that, are evolving. So there's going to be innovation in the business friction aspects of hardware adoption. But I believe the technology friction is going to be addressed through software. That's just my view at this point.
Got it. I know we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to get all your impressions on a few remaining questions, and then I just checked, and we have some Q&A from the virtual audience. So Equinix bought an edge play in packets recently. I'd be curious on all your opinion. Do you think we will see, this could be, 2020 could be the year of important edge M&A activity? Farad, do you have any, maybe start with you?
Yeah, I think M&A will form as people looking for investments to people who have cash. M&As will be important in the recovery of this economy. And so I think this edge computing is just another investment. I know there was a question of, is it hardware or software? And I think that may depend on, I think Hugh had a very good point, people who are willing to pivot that will tell you where the demand will be for the future.
Hugh, do you have a?
Oh yeah, we're batter's box on these acquisitions. So I don't think 2020 is going to be the year. I think you're going to see 2021 being quite hot. But those with cash are looking around now. When you take a look at this, going for scale organically is going to be a challenge. And so taking a look at assets that are available are going to be very instrumental in every business plan.
Gregg, how about you?
In lieu of, basically, companies have three options. They can build, they can buy it, or they can partner. So companies like Amazon, for instance, they can internally, organically build this whole business unit around edge. Obviously, they are putting out products like Outpost and Greengrass to get out there. But as far as being able to facilitate that with the physical infrastructure, the micro data centers to provide the power and the cooling and the connectivity, they can either try to do that themselves, or they can buy it, or they can partner with somebody. Right now, again, going back to my posit that we're in the very early innings of this, there are no mature companies out there that have hundreds of these or even dozens of these micro data centers out there that are adequately connected. So there's really no one to buy, or you can partner. And so I think that these companies are really looking to partner on this and potentially put in capital for sure to help mature this. But you know, I agree with Hugh. I don't think 2020 is a year that, I think companies are willing to look at companies like ours and Hughes to acquire, but from a responsibility to our current investors, I think we need to become more mature so that we protect equity.
Ganesh?
Prior to COVID, I was under the impression that 2020 would be the year of momentum for consolidation and investments. I wasn't making a distinction between M&A and investments. I do agree with the comment that Gregg made, which is people are going to figure this one out or by making investments rather than just looking at it from an acquisition point of view, because the landscape is still getting defined. However, it's not just limited to Packet being acquired by Equinix. Microsoft acquired Affirmed. One of the drivers apparently was 5G, and the software virtualization functionality that Affirmed Networks brought to the table was interesting to Microsoft. So there is going to be repositioning that's going to happen. There will be significant investments that will be made by the venture community as well as strategic investments that will be made by corporations. So I'm bullish on the investment side. I'm less convinced 2020 is the year of consolidation.
Got it. Okay. We have now 3 major carriers now that the Sprint T-Mobile merger is complete. I don't know if you can plead the 5th, but curious as to which of those carriers you think is best positioned in the edge based on what they've done now. Of course, those 3 carriers are AT&T, Verizon, and the new T-Mobile.
Is this question for me?
Yes, sorry. Ganesh, why don't you start?
Okay. Yeah, so it's still the early stages. Let me put it slightly differently. If you look at it from the prism of connectivity and how connectivity is going to be the driver for edge adoption, the one who is going to adopt 5G the fastest in terms of their subscribers adopting it, not just being able to provide coverage, this is going to be something that we have to wait and watch. But edge is not just a connectivity paradigm. I firmly believe it's a data center and a computing paradigm also overlapping with connectivity. So in that side of the equation, telcos are just evolving from the appliance model to having virtualized infrastructure. They're just evolving. So I would put all of them in the same category. But if I look at it globally, the one that's probably leading from a carrier perspective, in my opinion, is Rakuten.
Rod, how about
because they've taken a very distributed infrastructure and a software-driven network plus cloud approach to the equation.
Great. Rod,
Yeah.
how about you? What's your
Yeah, I think this COVID crisis has changed a lot of balance sheets for a lot of businesses that maybe we're looking at it and we're talking about it from the standpoint of edge and 5G. But there are other pieces of the businesses of AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile Sprint that's going on to the capacity that they have. Verizon may be well positioned to take it from the infrastructure lead edge, but I do believe as the others will quickly reemerge and while there may be one early adopter, they're all recognizing the importance of this going forward. So the rethinking behind this, I think that there's a fast evolution of edge technologies that's being worked on so that others will catch up. But
and don't forget private networks. Private networks is going to be big as part of the edge equation.
I do want to get everyone in. So Hugh, how about your view?
I think it's too early to identify. The carriers have got their own challenges amongst each other. So it's not really, wireless has always been that last mile. Wireless, the cellular. So obviously they're very much focused on that. They've got a multi-billion-dollar build as it stands in front of them now. They've got all of their eyes open on what this is and how it pertains to them. I can assure you that mistakes made in the past will not be replicated, which is why you're going to see some caution here. Everybody came out very quickly and said, oh my gosh, we're going to get AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon on as customers. And then they were all surprised as to why they didn't. Because they are watching this very closely and having sat in those meetings with their C-suites in terms of what their requirements are, what are their gauges to move forward, what do they need from us as a provider in the edge. These are all being developed as we speak.
Gregg, how about you?
Don't forget Mr. Charlie Ergen at Dish. I think that he gets
Very
to build.
good comment, Gregg.
He gets to build from scratch and close to Ganesh's heart. It's all going to be a software built core. And I think they are willing to share infrastructure, unlike the other 3. So don't forget about Dish.
Great. That's a very good point, and it's hard to forget about him at all. And recent news is there's been mixed news. Some would say he's had a hard time getting a partner in the wake of COVID. Others would say there's a note out this morning by a competitor saying he's actually using some differentiated equipment providers. How seriously do you all take Dish? Gregg, I'll circle back to you. It seems like very serious, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Well, how serious? I think 5G in any meaningful capacity to be monetized is still 3 to 4 years away. So it's not even an argument that needs to be made at this point.
Farad, how about you? On Dish. I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I agree. I think it's early. We're talking about this like it's advanced, but it's early in the infrastructure needs of these companies. So never know what's going to be the accelerator to make this work.
Hugh, how about you?
No opinions at this point. I think there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages, but I think they definitely have opportunity.
Ganesh, what about, I'm going to ask you more about, we've talked about the wireless providers and Dish, but there is obviously Microsoft and Amazon. We've mentioned Amazon with the Outpost and Green Edge. I think I wrote it down correctly. But we've heard that Microsoft's there in a big way with an RFI out there with more edge deployments. Do you think they're actually the serious tech player to take advantage of?
Certainly. In fact, all hypercloud vendors and the hyper data center vendors are going for a little ahead of the operators, in my view, because they've taken edge as an extension of the cloud, or edge as an extension of the centralized data center paradigm, which is easier for them because the compute part is very easy for them. The software part is still an evolution for them. So the answer is, if we were to look at the acquisitions that Microsoft has made recently, or even the investments that they've made in companies like Volterra, I believe they are making they're paying significant attention to the new internet architecture vis-a-vis the edge. That's my view on Microsoft. As to whether which part of the equation is going to be the focus area of growth for them, whether it's the private network piece that they're going to focus on, given that CBRS is a thing. Is it going to be an extension of their Wi-Fi business? Is it going to be an extension of the acquisitions they made and get a foray into the telco land and have 5G as a service opportunity that they want to bring to the table? I don't have my crystal ball telling me anything about Microsoft's strategy here, but I think they are going to be a non-trivial participant in the edge internet ecosystem.
And we have like about 3 minutes left, or 2 minutes actually. So maybe I just ask for, there's been so much pontification of whether this economy is going to be V-shaped, U-shaped, L-shaped, but I won't ask you to comment on that, but I would ask to comment on whether you see the edge coming out of the COVID crisis. Do you think that will be a V and that there'll be tremendous urgency from all we've seen, or more of a U, it will come, but it might be more of a baseline at the bottom, or just an L? It sounds like not an L, but Farad, maybe just start with that, or, I guess I just ask the letter and then we'll have to end it.
I wish I could do it. So I'd be on Wall Street right now and not talking with you. But unfortunately, COVID has changed the way that we work and live. And so as a result, I don't know what's going to happen. I do think edge will be a key component, because as companies talk around redeploying the way they work and how they work with people and their devices and how that works, I think there will be an opportunity here for edge, a huge opportunity.
Hugh?
Yeah, so very quickly, there were a lot, been speaking to almost all parties in this environment that's been looking at this environment for quite some time. Why I say that is because a noticeable change has occurred, and we are people that have said, hey, I'm still looking at it, I'm interested, but they're very busy doing it themselves or trying to internalize it. This has been a compelling event. Many networks have stumbled. Many big networks have stumbled. Due to no fault of their own, the traffic went from commercial real estate to residential in one massive shift, and that is not how the network was set up for. So this has given a lot of fodder to investing in this space. And so I said in our prep call, I mean, if you're not getting calls from the big boys at this point, then you're not in the game.
Great color. Gregg?
I just found this little feature here called chat. Very cool. And I'm going to use my time. Some people are asking to define what a micro data center is.
Okay.
It's basically, think of a 12 by 20 or 30-foot structure, purpose built. It's a mini data center, has all of the security, biometrics, cooling, power, network, that when you're inside, you feel like you're inside a real data center, but it's just a smaller footprint. And you can, not to advertise here, but you can go to edgemicro.com, and right up front, there's a 2-minute video walking you through a micro data center.
Great, Ganesh. I'm going to have to keep it short. So
Yeah,
UV.
I'm going to stick to it's a S curve. We are still in the growth stages of the S curve, not because we are a software company.
Got it. Okay.
Was it short enough for S?
That's good. Well, we're going to end it here, and it is Bring Your Daughter and Son to Work Day. So this is my e-schooler, my 13-year-old girl. And I want to thank everyone here for the time, the access. I took copious notes, so you taught me more than I think I taught anyone else. Stay safe, everyone, and thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Jennifer.
you for the opportunity. Pleasure to be on.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.